So dear friends, I'll just do a little sound check. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. So dear Ty, dear friends, it's a great pleasure to be with you today on February the 2nd to explore our topic, Zen Spirit, Celtic Spirit. And I think Terry hinted at the reason why we have this subject today. It's because today was a key date in the Celtic calendar. They acknowledge this date as the start of spring, the beginning of the stirring of life, the first signs of life after the hard winter. And might be good to say, who am I calling the Celts for this, for the purposes of this talk? And as Terry's said, they are the land ancestors of this land. The Celts at one time were a culture that spanned the whole of mainland Europe, the UK, Ireland, and parts of Turkey. And it started just after the time of the Buddha, around 400 BC, but was replaced in this country with the Roman Empire and being absorbed into that way of thinking. So the early Celts, they held gods and goddesses, and later Celts became Celtic Christians. And they lived at what was the mid to end of the Iron Age. So if you've ever visited any Iron Age encampments, they would have been places where the Celts would have lived their lives and celebrated things like Imbolc, which is today. So why might they inspire us with our Zen practice? As our far land ancestors, they were closer to nature than ourselves. They were attuned to the land and nature. They had to work with it and understand how it was working. And they appreciated and valued the key things that they needed for life that often we take for granted. I think it goes without saying they had no running water, central heating, freezers or air freighted food to sustain them in difficult times. And they had no A&E departments or antibiotics to care for them. They had no smartphones or streaming services or many other things to divert themselves. So in contrast, our connection with nature as a society is much weaker than theirs. And their average life expectancy was about 40, which is half of ours. So their life was much more precarious and more in touch with impermanence, which we know is one of our key teachings. So these were some of the reasons that Terry and I thought it would be interesting to explore this subject of how can our Celtic land ancestors inspire us in our Zen teachings. So one of the ways I prepared for this was not doing lots of research because, as Terry said, there's not a lot written down, but actually by going out and being in nature as they would have been, to feel the change in the heat of the sun and the length of the day and the different types of weather at this time of year. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to recap on some of our key Zen teachings and then look at a couple of key Celtic concepts and how we can weave these together to find a new some inspiration and support in our practice. So from our practice side of things, the Zen teachings, I'm going to recap on the 2 wings of practice and the 3 Dharma seals. And for the Celtic concepts, I'm going to consider how they valued learning by heart. They felt that key spiritual teachings were too valuable to be written down. And I think that's something worth considering. And then I'm going to look at their connection with heat, light and water, which is something that is particularly celebrated today on Imbolc. So let's think about our two wings of practice. So the first wing is stopping and calming, to be present, to unite our body and mind. So if this is my body, we know my body can only be in the present moment. Your body can only be in the present moment. But we know our mind can be in many places. It's a bit of a time traveller and is jumping off to different spots. So this very first thing we do in our practice is to bring our mind back to our body, to unite mind and body in the present moment. And we know it'll fly off again and get distracted, but we keep coming back to unite body and mind, to stop and be in this present moment. And that's a very important first step. Many of you will know about my golden glitter jar. So another way of seeing how our mind works is it has a lot of thoughts, like the glitter in this jar. And we can always be giving energy to our thoughts with distractions. With our own thoughts, we can distract ourselves. Things external to us can distract us. And there can be a lot of motion and agitation created within ourselves. And our stopping and calming is about limiting how much we stimulate our mind, being aware when we're stimulating and coming back to the present, being aware when we're stimulating so that we can settle and calm. And when we do this, when we stop running, when we can calm, then we can see life in a clearer, calmer, more still way. And this enables us to do the second wing of practice, which is to look deeply, to be still and look deeply. So the light and clarity that we can see now in this jar is clearly always there, but we're the people that create the obscurity with all our mental activity. So it's good to remember that the light and clarity is always within us, but it's about how do we cultivate that. And when we have some of that stillness and clarity, then we can gain insights into the true nature of life. And one of the things that we can notice is impermanence. And this is what our Celtic ancestors would have seen at this time, the changing length of the day. The length of day is impermanent. The amount of light that we get is impermanent. The warmth of the light is impermanent. And also there's cycles to life, and we can see that within and around us. So the first Dharma seal is impermanence. And the second Dharma seal is around our interconnectedness, that we are not alone, that we have, as the meditation said, the earth within us. The bread that we've had for our breakfast this morning came from the wheat, which came from the soil. We have the soil, the earth in us, in our bones, in our muscles. We can't take that out of us and still be us. And it's the same with the water, with the air that we're breathing, and with the warmth that we get from the sun that allows things to grow for us to eat. And again, our Celtic ancestors would have understood this interconnectedness and been very aligned with it. And another way we see our interconnectedness is with the ancestors, those people that came before us, who created the causes and conditions for our life now. And our Zen spirit embraces not only our blood ancestors, but our spiritual ancestors and our land ancestors. And we wouldn't be here in this place with the conditions of our lives as they are without these ancestors. So that's two of the Dharma seals, the first impermanence, the second the interconnectedness, and the third is around nirvana, the ultimate dimension. And this is very different from our historic dimension. This is a deep river that goes beyond our daily experience. And the words that we use for daily life can't encompass or describe it. It's something we have to experience for ourselves in moments of deep clarity. So these are some of the teachings that we go into on retreats. And I remember my very first retreat with Thich Nhat Hanh. It was 35 years ago, and it was in a very beautiful place in South Devon by the sea. And there was a beautiful standout moment for me towards the end of the retreat when Ty took us out to stand in the evening, in the dark of the evening, to look at the full moon. So you can maybe imagine I'm standing on these cliffs next to Ty, seeing a full moon, and it felt like I was seeing that moon for the first time and feeling the earth really beneath my feet for the first time and hearing the waves on the shore gently beneath. And there was also something very connected about that moment, that I felt connected to everything and not alone and adrift in the world. And just in that moment, it felt like everything was complete and perfect, and it was beyond any experience I'd had before that. And I can still recall the space and the group and the feeling of that moment. And I think our Celtic spiritual friends would have enjoyed moments like that too. Moments on their cliff top or hilltop encampments where they were totally present to the sky, the moon, the sea if it was there, the air, and the ancestors in them. And in our teachings, we can say that these moments are a part-time enlightenment. That's what Thai encourages us to consider, being part-time Buddhas. And we can get that part-time sense of belonging to life and everything in a way that's completely different to our identification with ourselves. And for me, it felt like just letting go of my self-importance and my complexes and labels and going beyond to a deeper level of being where those concepts are really redundant and the words we have can't adequately describe that dimension of life. So this moment of seeing the moon with Thich Nhat Hanh made a real impression on me. And when a few years later I became pregnant, I called the little baby that was growing in me Shining Moon. And never till this year have I told anyone else that was that was what I did. But it was a way that I kind of was connecting the new life in my body with that special moment, and that felt important to me. So maybe we can just enjoy a sound of the bell. I hope that you can hear my bell. Maybe tell me if you can't. So as we've said, our Celtic ancestors, they lived much closer to the land. They needed to be in harmony with the cycles of the year. And they had to live more in tune with nature, using the natural light, getting their water from wells or other sources, natural sources, using the food that they could harvest around them or forage around them, and appreciating the sounds of the natural world, the sights of the natural world, the stars, the bird songs, the animal activities, and their own creativity, their own stories, songs, and music making. So living quite a simple life in tune with nature. And this spirit of simplicity in living is very much part of our Zen spirit, and is encompassed in our mindfulness trainings, the importance of living simply, without a lot of desires, without a lot of possessions or ambition. And one of the things that I found it very interesting that the Celts valued was the oral tradition, the value of passing things down and learning by heart. The Celtic priests and priestesses deemed that their teachings were too precious to be written down. And we know also that in the early days, Buddhism was passed on by oral transmission. And I think it's interesting to compare that to today, when we have so many sources of the written word on our phones, on laptops, we have so many books, we can get words so quickly, and we don't need to rely on our memory very much. But the teachings, however beautiful they are on a piece of paper, if we don't put them into practice in our lives, are not worth anything to us. It's the living Dharma that makes a difference in our lives, the things that we've internalized and use regularly to navigate our lives. And I know that Ty shares about when he became a novice monk at 16, he was given a book of little poems to memorize. And these were poems for different activities during the day, so that he could use these little poems to keep him focused on what he was doing in that moment. And these poems we can use as well. They're called gathas, and they can help us to really connect with the activity and the life that we're undertaking in that moment, as well as the interconnectedness and beauty and depth of that moment. And so there are these poems for waking up in the morning, filling a glass with water, having a meal, as we use the toilet, as we walk, and much more. And so it feels to me that this is maybe something we can be inspired by the Celts to do, is to learn some things by heart, so that we can recall them when we feel that we would like to come back to ourselves, to the moment. And it's interesting to me, because sometimes we can think the poems are very simple, and maybe we use them when we start our practice, but maybe we don't continue to use them. You know, we become more advanced and perhaps we think we don't need them. So I was very moved by a story that Brother Phap Hu told, that when Thai was probably in his 80s and Brother Phap Hu was his attendant, that they were doing walking meditation, and Phap Hu asked Thai what he was doing, and Thai said, "I'm using the Gata, breathing in, I know I'm taking this step, and breathing out, I know I'm taking this step. Breathing in, I've arrived in this moment. Breathing out, I'm at home." And so to be aware that our teacher used these poems throughout his life, not just at the beginning as a novice, was very moving. And I know it also moved Brother Phap Hu, who shared that he had kind of let his practice with these poems slip a little. So that's something we might feel inspired to practice with, and I'm going to offer you a few garters in a moment. So the other things that was very important, or another thing that was important to the Celts, were their main celebrations of the year. And there were 4 of them, and they occur at what's called cross-quarter points of the year. And these are the times, the 4 annual points of the year that fall between a solstice and an equinox. And this includes today, which is called Imbolc, which means in the navel. And this referred to the first signs of life beginning to emerge from the womb of Mother Earth. It was a time when the lambing season might begin, and when lactating animals were preparing to give birth. And interestingly, it was celebrated from the evening of February the 1st to the evening of February the 2nd. So if we could think back to Celtic times and this time of year, that people would have used a lot of their stored food, their stored wood to keep warm, and their stocks would be run down, having got them through the cold winter. So the first signs of life breaking through from the cold winter was something that they wanted to celebrate, and that this was a cause for hope and celebration. Even though spring wasn't fully here yet, it was seen as the beginning of spring, the new life stirring. But it clearly isn't the fullness of spring, and it's a sort of transitional time, a liminal time between the hibernating, slower energy of winter and the more lively, active energy of late spring, when everything is bursting forward. So this is a time to begin to stretch out after the winter rest, to begin moving, but gently, to begin cultivating, but gently, to warm up gently before the sprint of the full spring. And I went out walking on what would have been a Celtic site yesterday evening. And I could see that some of the trees were quickening. You could see the twigs were thicker than they'd been in the depths of winter, that the sap was rising and beginning to come into the ends of the twigs and the branches. So these are signs of life that our Celtic ancestors would have seen, and we can also maybe see in our own gardens or around us little bulbs coming up as well. So as the sun's light and warmth began to increase, Imbolc today was a festival of purification and cleansing, clearing the darkness of winter in order to welcome the light of spring. And it was a fire festival associated with Brigid, goddess of the sacred fire, who brings fertility, wisdom and healing, and teaches how to nurture the land. And the light and warmth that we're getting more of at this time of the year are conditions that support fertility on the earth, that provide the conditions to grow food that can support and sustain us. So one thing we can do to honour our Zen spirit and the Celtic spirit is to eat mindfully. As we eat our food, we can benefit, and as we benefit from the fertility of the earth today, in whatever we're going to eat later, we can be mindful of the earth, the conditions of the fertility, and the miracle of the food that we have to eat. And one of the things we might want to say is, before we eat, is a couple of lines, which is part of the 5 contemplations. So some of you, I know, are aware of the 5 contemplations, but for those of you that aren't, we can We can acknowledge before we eat and say something like, this food is the gift of the earth, the sky, numerous living beings, and much hard loving work. May I live in a way that will honour this gift. So just stopping to connect with the miracle of food in front of us is a way that we can honour our Zen and Celtic spirit. And on this day of celebration of outer light and warmth and the conditions of fertility, the Celts would light fires and candles to acknowledge the returning of warmth and light, to welcome the returning sun. And the hearth and candles were symbols of hope and coming fertility. So maybe we can also celebrate that we have light and heat, and it comes so easily to us today. And I found some little poems that we might like to practice with. There's one for lighting a candle, but we could also use it for switching on a light. And it goes like this. Lighting this candle, offering the light to countless Buddhas. The peace and the joy I feel brighten the face of the earth. Lighting this candle, offering the light to countless Buddhas. The peace and the joy I feel brighten the face of the earth. And for turning on the heat, we can say something like, warmth flowing in this space, throughout space and within my body. The sun offering warmth for all in the cosmos. May I offer warmth to myself and others. Warmth flowing in this space, throughout space and within my body. The sun offering warmth for all in the cosmos. May I offer warmth to myself and others. So we have an opportunity to, even if we don't want to use poems, to consider how we use heat and light, and also to notice the external changes that are happening at this time. And another way the Celts celebrated was visiting a local well to give thanks for the water, because the water is a key condition for fertility and life, and wells were precious places. Again, they were transitional places where the water came out of the darkness and the depths of the earth into the light of the sky. So they were seen as sacred places where what was needed for life, or a key thing that was needed for life, was provided. And in later times, they're often associated with saints' names, with Celtic saint names. At this time of year, there was the idea of washing away the darkness and using the water for fertility. So we can also celebrate the gift of water that we have running in our homes. And we can take some moments to appreciate the miracle of life, to see the cloud in our glass. So Tai talks about seeing the cloud in our glass. We can also see the dewdrops that transpire into the cloud and come into our glass. And the streams and the rivers, the underground sources, the reservoirs, so many things to offer us a glass of water to drink. And there's a lovely little poem for turning on the water. And it goes like this. Water comes from high mountain sources. Water runs deep in the earth. Miraculously, water comes to us and sustains all life. My gratitude is filled to the brim. Water comes from high mountain sources. Water runs deep in the earth. Miraculously, water comes to us and sustains all life. My gratitude is filled to the brim. And there's one for washing our feet, which is quite short and quite joyful. It says, the peace and joy of one toe is the peace and joy for my whole body. The peace and joy of my one toe is peace and joy for my whole body. So maybe we might like to make up our own little poems if we don't feel moved by any of these, or we can find some of these, they are online, or we can send them in an email afterwards. But it can be quite inspiring to have some of these poems memorized, so that when we are going around our daily life, we can bring them out to encourage us to connect with the present moment, to connect with the wonder of life that we have in front of us. So we've been talking about external light and warmth, but in our practice, we can also see that warmth and light are also the conditions that support our inner fertility. Our inner light helps us to see more clearly, the joys that we have in life, our own patterns of kindness, of happiness, and how we can rejoice in these and the supportive conditions of our lives. And our inner light also helps us to see more clearly our own patterns of difficulty, of anger, of greed, of shame, and to bring warmth and kindness to these parts of ourselves to help transform and heal the inner difficult conditions of our lives. And when we notice difficulty and suffering in us, we can bring awareness, our mindfulness, which is I kind of think of our mindfulness as a light that also has warmth in it, the warmth of love, acceptance and compassion. So if we shine our mindfulness on our difficulties, then we can see it more clearly and we can embrace our difficulty with acceptance and care. And this enables us to try and understand our suffering better, so that we can have a dialogue, understand the conditions that may have caused this suffering in us. Maybe we've inherited something from our ways of seeing, or the ways of seeing of people around us, our community, our culture, that are causing us difficulties in this moment. But with our internal light and warmth, we can help those difficulties settle, to heal and to transform. And at this time of year, it's not only that there is life stirring externally, that the trees, the sap is rising in the trees, that some bulbs are breaking the surface of the earth, but also maybe we're aware that there's more energy stirring in us, that we also feel more animated and energetic a little bit more as the returning light and heat comes. And maybe we can use this energy to nourish and care for our suffering. rather than investing it in dispersion and distraction. We know our teacher talked about growing lotuses from the mud of suffering. Or we can talk about roses from the compost of our suffering. And so this can be a way that we can work with the increased energy that we have in our body at this time by going inward rather than seeking outer distraction. So I spoke about when I became pregnant, calling the little baby inside me Shining Moon. I just come back to that. So at that time, I was very happy to be pregnant, and it was about this time of year. I was about 4 months pregnant, and I was also going to Plum Village with one of my closest spiritual friends. So it felt like there was two big adventures before me in my life. And because I was 4 months pregnant, I'd gone through the danger period of a pregnancy, gaining a miscarriage, having the morning sickness. And so I was feeling quite well in myself. And I was all ready for the trip to go to Plum Village on the train. And the evening before I was due to go, my husband and I went just to a noodle bar to get some food. And within an hour, I knew I wasn't going to get to Plum Village because I started to suffer severe stomach pains and bleeding. And so instead of getting on the train to Plum Village, I ended up in St Thomas's Hospital in London, which is where we lived. And the scan showed a beating heart, but the diagnosis was very grim. And one of the top consultants in the country came to tell me that there was no way for the baby to survive, as all the conditions to allow that had broken down. But they didn't understand why or how, and they didn't know either if I would be able to be to conceive and hold a baby to term again, or in the future. And so obviously this wasn't what I thought I would be facing into a couple of days earlier. A couple of days earlier, I was all happy, everything was going well, and this is impermanence showing up in a very real way in my life. But after the consultant had gone and my husband and my mother had to leave, I was left in a very small room in St Thomas's Hospital, and I turned to the practice to support me. And one of the things that I felt called to do was to walk up and down, just breathing and touching the life inside me, not getting lost in my stories or the negative feelings that were rushing around, because in this moment I didn't want to rush to the future. I knew the baby was there with a beating heart, and I didn't know what the future would hold. The future seemed very uncertain and very frightening, and so I wanted to be in that moment in a way that I never really wanted to be in the present moment before. And I didn't want to go back to the past. There didn't seem to be any point in that. I wanted to be there for that little life inside me in that moment. And so I just put one foot in front of the other, just breathing in, being aware of my body, being aware of the little life inside me, and taking a step and taking another step. And in a way it felt as if I was walking on a narrow ridgeway, I could feel that I could fall into a valley at any time of self-pity, of grief, but I was able to walk on that ridge path just by taking one step in mindfulness, just by taking a second step in mindfulness. And I could only take 5 steps in each direction, so I had to keep turning around. But just walking like this and committing to be really present and not wanting to be anywhere else, it really felt like that moment when I'd been with Ty seeing the moon for the first time. It felt a very complete moment of totally belonging in that space, a deep presence. But now it was more sustained and spacious and complete. There was the part-time had become a bit more part-time. And I didn't feel that anything was missing or anything was needed. And it seemed very strange, but in that moment where there was a lot of transition and continuation, impermanence, a sudden impermanence, not a gradual impermanence, that I could touch this different dimension of life. It was like Plum Village was there for me in that moment, that my spiritual tradition was there for me, the ancestors were there for me, that all of life and all of the life that's gone before was there for me. And that's part of our teaching as well, that Plum Village is inside of us, that our ancestors are inside of us, that we're made of the whole cosmos. We don't need to go anywhere special, because sacredness is all around us, but it's also within us, even in high-rise hospitals in desperate moments. And so today it's 30 days since Shiny Moon's heart stopped beating. And it was in bulk. And at first it was a dance not to see it as a loss and a great sorrow. But with the perspective of 3 decades, I can see that it offered me a deep trust in the present moment. And it offered me the ability to touch into a level of care and love in me that I didn't even know was there. And offered me a level of spiritual confidence, that I can put my confidence in the Dharma, in my steps, in difficult moments, and that there will be support for me in that time. So Shining Moon didn't die that day because they live on in me, in my practice, in my presence, in my healing and transformation, and in what I can share with my teaching. And in the same way, our Celtic land ancestors live on in us. They cared for the land, and their bodies returned to this land that we're inhabiting, and they are there for us. Their wisdom, simplicity, and honouring of nature. And in this time when we know there's ecological breakdown, I think it's good to feel their wisdom and honouring of nature, and to be able to connect with that. So we know, as we said at the beginning, our interconnectedness with our spiritual blood, non-human ancestors, land ancestors. They're all here for us. And sacredness is in every step we take. And we know also that our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, Thai, did this in the midst of the killing fields of the Vietnam War. And that from the mud of the suffering of that time, he was able to cultivate the beautiful lotuses of the Plum Village tradition that we now have flourishing around the world. So let's listen to a sound of the bell to breathe with our teacher, our ancestors, and our beloved ones who are in us and no longer with us in physical form, but whose wisdom and support we can call on within ourselves. So, dear friends, I just wanted to finish with a poem from John O'Donoghue and a sort of Zen response that I've created. So I think many of you may know John O'Donoghue, who is an author, an Irish author, who's written a lot about many beautiful books imbued with the Celtic spirit. And this is a poem that speaks to some of the things that we've been hearing. May the nourishment of the earth be yours. May the clarity of light be yours. May the fluency of the oceans be yours. May the protection of the ancestors be yours. And so may a slow wind work these words of love around you, an invisible cloak to mind your life. And I think our invisible cloak for me is mindfulness. It offers us light and warmth, awareness and love to mind our lives. So I've written a short Zen response. Let us wear our invisible cloak every moment. Let us renew it every day with joy and love. Let us share its protection and beauty with others. Let us weave the jewels of our healing and transformation into every fibre. Let us support and inspire each other on the path of understanding and love. For our precious earth, our ancestors, our descendants, and all beings. Thank you, dear friends.